Pisces video. So we're just a few days coming up, approaching the new moon, and it's quite an intense week because we've got not only Venus and Mercury square Saturn at the moment, which is creating a lot of I would say feelings of hitting a wall. You know, it's a lot of resistance and a lot of reality checks going on. In kind of this way that is probably bursting some of the Pisces bubble. So we're having to now look at, okay, where are the limitations? What's reality versus fantasy? It's a little bit like coming out of a drug haze, or, you know, waking up, like sobering, you know, like it's kind of like an emotional hangover as we're going into this dark lunar phase, because we just had the full moon a few weeks ago, which was really quite romantic and very passionate and charged and exciting. And now it's a little bit of like, okay, but how are we ready to commit? Do we want to go deeper into our commitments? Where do we want to stop and pause and rethink things? Because let's not forget, Mercury's also about to station retrograde. So we're in sort of a pause time, and not only that, but Chiron's very active at this new moon. The new moon is in late degrees of Pisces, conjunct Chiron. So we're also really feeling this, it's like some of our most sensitive wounds getting triggered right now. And whether we're conscious of it or not, because Pisces can be a little bit more on the unconscious side. So we're having to look at, maybe there's something unconscious going on. We have these patterns that we repeat, where often Chiron in Pisces has a lot to do with these deeper abandonment wounds, or where we want to lose ourselves, you know, where we want to find that deep abandon, that soul abandon, and what our soul is truly longing for. And often it's not something that we can get from this world. When we're dealing with Pisces, we're often longing for something beyond this realm. And the pain and the disillusionment is realizing that it's not going to come from an external object. It's like we're projecting that onto the object, whatever that is, whether it's another person, you know, a romantic relationship, or literally a substance, or even like whatever we think is going to be the perfect escape fantasy to take us away from the pain. We're now being confronted with the reality behind that. And then, not that we should abandon the soul, you know, the soul's longings, but it's a time where we have to go deeper and realize that we're the sources within us. And what we're disillusioned with outside is something that we have to come back and do the inner work. It's all happening internally, and we always want the shortcut. We want to get the fix outside of us. We want to lose ourselves in something bigger than us often, and that's okay as long as it takes us back into ourselves. I mean, even romantic relationships, if it takes you back into yourself in a deeper way, it's okay. It's when you lose yourself in that kind of the unconscious side of Pisces way, when you lose a part of yourself in the other, to the point that you are abandoning yourself again, because we're having this abandonment theme. So we don't want to get so deeply lost in the illusions. I mean, it's fun for a little while, but we always have to come up for air and realize, okay, you know, that was a projection, that was a dream. I mean, all of this is a projection and a dream, ultimately. So, but this dream is really, since we're in the darkest part of the moon, it's like the moon tarot card in the tarot deck. Pisces is very connected to that moon card. So, because it is all about, as I mentioned, that the Virgo full moon, that was the polarity, but now we're all on the side of Pisces with Chiron. So we're really in the disillusionment. We don't have the grounding of Virgo right now, but we do have some planets starting to emerge into Aries. So there is that individuation coming out of that swampy, deep, dark, unconscious realm of Pisces. Now we can see some fire emerging. and the individuation process re-emerging, coming into ourselves, coming back into ourselves. Often we dissolve and get lost in something, and whether, there's a lot of talk about addictions, and often through addiction we have to re-emerge back into a more conscious relationship with the self. So this is a really powerful time of all of us coming into a re-emergence of some kind, and looking at where we got a little lost, perhaps, where we were drowning in some kind of delusion, where we were deluded, or we were seeing things the way we wanted to see them, based on something that still needs to be fulfilled within us. So it's a really important time now to look at some of our deeper wounds and how they're being replayed. So for instance, if you have an abandonment wound, you may keep choosing situations or partners where you get abandoned. Or if you have this desire to lose yourself in another, you may find relationships that just consume you until you feel completely lost and disconnected from yourself, and then you have to return to yourself. Or, if you have other addictive tendencies, this is a time to really look at where you have to curb those tendencies and come back into yourself. So it's doing the deeper work now. And dreams can be the guide, because Pisces is the dream. So often we'll get the symbols and the images through our dreams to help navigate, help guide us through some of the more unconscious territory of Pisces. So I highly recommend working with your dreams at this point. Even if you only have a fragment of an image, if you just carry that around, Jung said to carry it around with you like a precious object. If you're willing to do that, there's so much gold that can come from that. And it might not make sense to you right at the time of the dream, but if you're willing to hold on to that image, even if it makes no sense, it will. Just carry it around with you until it starts to reveal itself to you. Often it can be the most simple image. I had a dream recently. It was very, very simple, and yet I know, and even if I told you the image, it would sound like almost cliche, which is why you have to kind of guard the sacredness of the image, because to me personally, it has a very significant very significant meaning. And I know if I carry it around with me, and I have been carrying it around with me for almost a month now, and it's really got a deeper underlying message to me, and it's continuing to work on me and open things up in my psyche, because I've been willing to honor and revere the power and the symbolism. So don't think you have to have a very long, elaborate, complicated dream in order for it to be meaningful and to continue to work with you and on you. So this is really an important time for us to look into what's happening on an unconscious level, and to look at the patterns. What are the patterns that we keep reiterating in our lives? And, for instance, sometimes, you'll read a book and it speaks to you, and then you think, okay, I got that message. And then it can be 10 years later, maybe you pick up that same book and you read that same page, and you're like, oh my God, that's still the message, and I'm still working on that theme. It's 10 years later and I still have a lot of work to do on it. But the work never ceases. It doesn't mean that you haven't progressed at all in 10 years. It just means that there's still more work to be done. So don't give up. It just means that there's more layers, and the more we recognize the patterns, the more likely we are to break through them. And that's the gift of all this Chiron energy. But we first have to look at where our own wounded healer is really revealing to us the ongoing work that needs to be done. And since it's in Pisces, because Chiron will be coming into Aries soon, but while he's finishing up this stint in Pisces, we have to look at where our abandonment wounds are, and also where we've been delusional or disillusioned in some ways. So, there's just certain blind spots that we have. Pisces often has a lot to do with the blind spots and where we delude ourselves, where we wear these glasses with these filters, like the Instagram filters, and we choose to just see it that way. And what happens when you take all the filters off? what's left, and what are you dealing with on the other side of all of those projections, you know? So it can be painful to come in to recognize that disillusionment it has happened, you know, that we have had blind spots, or we have been kind of living in a fantasy world of some kind. So it's really important to look at that now, to be willing to come into as much consciousness as we can around our deeper wounds, our deeper soul longings, our deeper abandonment patterns, and also where our soul is really summoning us now, because Pisces is the soul. So it's the soul's calling that will then take us on, will initiate the hero or the heroine's journey, which Aries represents. But first, we're kind of coming out of this deep swamp of Pisces, you know, coming out of the sleep state, the deep unconscious. And to reemerge, we'll have the vernal equinox next week on the 20th of March. So that's a huge breakthrough. It's like literally the awakening of spring. So we're right on the verge of that. But first, it's a little bit of a dark time, so people can get a little depressed now. You know, Pisces can also kind of wallow in the depths of, you know, world weariness, as it's called. Like, we can feel a little world weary and a little bit down on just the tragedies of life. Chiron and Pisces can also bring up all the suffering. You know, it's a very compassionate sign, Pisces, but it can also bring up not just our longings, but all the deeper suffering that we see around us, and our own suffering. How have we suffered? What has made us suffer? So some of the homework I would give for this new moon would be to work with your soul's longings, to make a list. I used to actually, long ago when I would do performances in New York, we had a performance called Keeping the Channel Open, and part of that performance I created this book where I would pass around to people all over New York City to write down their soul's longings. Like, they each had a page to just write down whatever their deepest soul's longings were. And I feel like this moon is really churning up all of those soul longings. So to make a list yourself, to write down what your soul's longing for, would be a great gift at this new moon. And also to work with the patterns, like I mentioned, to look at where you have recently noticed some unconscious patterns surfacing in your life, and taking time to reflect on that, and how some of your own abandonment wounds are getting played out here. How are you feeling abandoned? Who's abandoned you in the past? And how do you abandon yourself, most importantly? How do we abandon ourselves by not being true to ourselves, or not showing up for ourselves, or hiding parts of ourselves from others, or ourselves even, you know, or from our life, where we're not coming into full presence, you know, into full integrity with who we are, because of whatever parts of us that felt invisible growing up, or we felt we had to hide those pieces of ourselves. So this is an important time to look at that as well. And also your own suffering, you know, how can you step into the role of your own healer? Where do you need more compassion for yourself or others? It's a time of forgiveness. Pisces is a sign of forgiveness. So the new moon, it's really excellent to look at where we can be more forgiving and compassionate. It starts with ourselves, because if we don't forgive ourselves, we're going to be really judgy and critical of other people. So we have to start with ourselves. I would recommend working with the Moon Tarot card also. I think that's an excellent archetypal force to, you know, if you have an image of that card, to work with and just see which symbols speak to you. Like I said, dream work at this time, getting reflexology or subtle body healing is also excellent at the Pisces new moon. And to get more sleep. Literally, a lot of people are saying they're more burned out with the time zone, the daylight savings time shift than usual. And I think it's because we're in this dark lunar phase. Not just that we're in the dark lunar phase, but also with the Mercury Venus square Saturn, and then also with the new moon conjuncting Chiron. That's also pretty exhausting. And also the new moon is, on the day of the new moon, Mars is changing signs. We should look at that too. It's very interesting that Mars will be leaving Sagittarius, and Mars and Sagittarius have been in this square with Chiron, which had also been triggering all of our deeper wounds. Been setting off those Chiron wounds. So now we're going to have the next phase, we're going to have Mars in his exaltation in Capricorn. So if you've been feeling really blasé and really kind of unfocused and just wanting to escape and not focus on details or mundane things, Mars in Capricorn will get you back on track, back into a strategic, very determined, courageous mode. So we'll get a lot of energy back, I think. We've been all kind of feeling like limping along here and a little bit wounded and tired and exhausted and maybe a little melancholy over the last week with, you know, the Venus Mercury square Saturn is harsh, and you know, and also Mercury about to station to go retrograde next week too. So it's just a lot of, and Jupiter, we didn't even talk about Jupiter retrograde. So the Jupiter retrograde in Scorpio too is also a little bit of a downer. You know, as he's shifting, it can bring up a lot of dark emotions because we're losing that kind of exuberance and expansiveness of Jupiter in Scorpio, very passionate. It's like stationing, and during the retrograde phase now, it's like we have to, whatever passions we were seeking externally, we have to bring back into ourselves. We've got to do a lot of that deeper shadow transformational work now internally. So it can feel like things are taken away from us at this time, but it's really an invitation for us to go deeper within and reclaim that passion. It doesn't mean you can't still have very passionate relationships, but you're just realizing that now you have to also reclaim that internal connection on a much deeper level. So, you know, and this week the energy is waning, so we just all like lower energy in general, and we need to conserve our energy more and get extra sleep, as I mentioned. Warm baths are also good during Pisces, or being near the ocean. Hot beverages in general. So I'm a multiple beverage gal. And avoid alcohol. It's more tempting. People in substances in general, people are more drawn to alcohol and other forms of intoxicating or just things that take you out of the ego. You know, we're more drawn to that. So you want to definitely, if you have an issue with that, be careful. And, or any drugs for that matter. It's just a time to watch any addictions right now. You want to just keep an eye on and not go for the escape mechanisms, and just go for things more like meditation and soul work, whatever feeds your soul. Like, go for the deeper connections now. Otherwise, there can be a lot of burnout and disillusionment, as I mentioned. So we want to stick to what really feeds us at a soul level. And that's also what cures the addictions, is when we connect with the divine, we connect to something of substance. We don't need the chemical substances, you know, the toxic substances in our life. That goes for everything. So the more divine the substance, it will eradicate the toxic substances in our life, or the fake. You know, it's like the real from the fake. So, and then we'll check back in 6 months to see how this new moon period turned out, because this is just the beginning. You know, we're just starting. So 6 months from now, we can see how the energy really panned out for us, and everything that unfolded from this new moon cycle. So look back in September for the full moon in Pisces to see. We're also going to have Navaratri coming up too after the new moon. So I'm going to be back in the celebration of the goddesses too. So there is more than light at the end of the tunnel. There's definitely a big rebirth happening, and spring is just around the corner. So hang in there. Okay, thanks for watching. Please share.